not by people we elect, but they're made by people we don't elect. The commissars, as the Germans call them, the people who meet behind closed doors, there are 30 of them, nobody knows really who they are.
Sure, but I want to give you the floor, but just to get it clear, you were there early on with Thatcher fighting it, from my research, and you were involved in the main launch of UKIP being successful, because from what I've read in newspapers, I mean, they say you and Nigel Farage are basically founders of it. I mean, I guess because you helped it become successful, they say that then.
I mean, certainly in Scotland, we've got it going. We've now got our first representation north of the border. I was leader of the party in Scotland when that happened. We are making waves right throughout Britain. We got an enormous percentage of the vote at the last general election, but didn't get more than one parliamentary seat, because when you first begin a breakthrough of this kind, you don't get many seats, and then you build on that. And next time we'll get still more, because what's going to happen is there's going to be a bogus negotiation where Cameron and the other European members will get together, they'll work out a few token concessions so that Cameron can then say to the people, well, I recommend that they've given us enough. What they won't have given us is our democracy back. And until they do, UKIP won't be satisfied. What we want to see is a right of the parliaments of member states to vote down legislation proposed by the EU unless and until the elected European Parliament, which at the moment doesn't even have the power to bring forward a bill, not much of a parliament that then, is given proper democratic power. If it's not given enough power, then we would rather just leave. So we've made huge advances in the European elections. We're now the largest party in Britain in the European Parliament. We've made very big advances also in the British elections. But we've now begun, rather surprisingly, to take votes almost as much from the Labour Party as from the Conservative Party. Because one of the things that Nigel has brilliantly done is to broaden the appeal of the party. So it's no longer just the intellectuals, the academics concerned about our democracy. It's ordinary working people who are now becoming concerned about our democracy.
Well, that's very exciting, but I mean, as somebody involved since the Thatcher administration, can you go back to the fight then? I mean, she was successful holding it back then they were able to ram it through by stealth, because I'm comparing it to how they're trying to ram through the TPP the very same way.
Absolutely. They could not get through what eventually became the Maastricht Treaty, which was the one where we finally gave our control of our laws away forever. They couldn't get that through while Margaret Thatcher was still in office. They had to get rid of her before they could do it. And it was the pro-European faction in the cabinet that plotted against her to bring her down, so that they could drag us in ever deeper into this mess of anti-democracy. And we fought that for as long as she was Prime Minister. They knew they couldn't get away with that. She was very willing to work with our European partners on matters of common advantage, but she was not willing to give away our democracy. And she stood very firm and very strong and very clear on this. And of course, it was very popular with the people. She was re-elected 3 times with huge majorities, precisely because she had taken a tough line, a pro-British line, and a pro-democracy line, because in her day, the two things went together. Now, Cameron is not of the same stamp. He's very different. He is saying, well, we want to stay in the European Union, and he will do whatever it takes to do it. It's not even clear that they will make sure that the referendum bill, which it has to be passed before a referendum can be held on this question, will pass the House of Lords, because...
Sure, but I mean, he is at least engaging in this lip service because of UKIP pressure, correct?
Absolutely. There's no doubt that had it not been for UKIP, he wouldn't even have made that promise before the last general election that this time he would give us a referendum.
So it shows the issue is now becoming more and more popular. People are more and more aware of it.
Now on the front pages. There's no longer can the establishment say this is something you can sweep under the carpet. No longer can they say this is just a few cranks. That's what they said of us, in the early years.
So isn't that a devastating victory for sovereignty worldwide?
I think this is enormous, because I think what's going to happen is that people worldwide will realize you can do this. You can fight City Hall on these democratic issues, and you can win. I want to end very briefly on one little point that you raised earlier about Tom Karl of the NOAA and fiddling the temperature data to try to pretend that there has been global warming over the last 18 years, 6 months, when the satellites show zero global warming over the last 18 years, 6 months. How has he done this? He's done it by fiddling the figures. And he fiddled them in a really clever way, but we've seen through it. Now, I've got a paper already up on the internet at whatsupwiththat.com, W-A-T-T-S, upwiththat.com, which explains that since the oceans below the surface, which he's talking about, are warming at only 1/5 of the rate he says the surface is warming at, and because the air immediately above the surface he's talking about is not warming at all, the conclusion is that he is simply making it up. His paper is, in fact, a breach of the laws of thermodynamics, which is how heat gets moved around. If you make a sandwich like the barbecue you and I had when I came to visit you in Austin, Texas, and you put meat in the middle and bread either side, if the bread is colder than the meat will cool down. It will not stay hotter than the bread. And what he's trying to say is that the surface in the middle of this sandwich between the air above and the ocean below is hotter than both. It can't be. It's as simple as that.
Incredible. We've got one more segment, and I do want to segue into this because it's all interconnected. We now know TPP, that's secret. Basically, the Asian Union emerged with the EU and the American Union under the Trilateral Plan. We now know, Lord Monckton, as you know, that it does have that in it. Just outrageous.
Well, this is an enormous disgrace that Obama is insisting as the price of American cooperation in this and any other international agreement that the countries with whom he does business have to kowtow to this climate monster by shutting down their major industries. And already your coal industry is on its knees, already your utilities are on their knees, already your aluminium smelters are going overseas, your steelworks are going overseas, and paradoxically, therefore, emitting more CO2 because they operate under more inefficient overseas regimes than if they'd stayed at home. But he doesn't care. These were the people who used to be the big donors for the Republican Party, and this has nothing to do with the climate, but everything to do with Obama trying to destroy the funding of his political opponents. It is as straightforward as that. It's very typical.
It's a mafia takeover. It's like Hitler, for 5 years before he rounded them up, wouldn't let Jews and others run their shops to first make them destitute before he actually grabbed them. You take people's power away before you kill them.
That's exactly what he's been trying to do, and that's the significance of Tom Karl's paper today. After the break, I'll tell you a very funny story about me and Tom Karl in front of Congress.
Sure, I actually skipped the break, Lord Monckton, to give you more time.
Yeah, sure. Do you want to carry on now? Or
yeah, go ahead. I just skipped it. Go ahead.
Okay, fine. Right, what we're going to do is, about 2009 this was, I've been invited by the Republicans to testify as their witness in front of Congress, opposite Tom Karl, who, of course, was the Democrats' witness. Now, Tom Karl is the head of the National Climatic Data Center, which is a subdivision of the National Oceanographic and Atmospheric Administration, and it, among other things, keeps a global temperature record. Now, I was explaining to Congress, and I showed them a chart, which demonstrated that for the 8 previous years, there had actually been global cooling. Now, Representative Joe Barton of Texas, who was the Republican ranking member on the committee at that time, said to Tom Karl, he said, but you and other officials have been coming here for months telling us we've got global warming. Lord Monckton says there hasn't been any. In fact, it's been cooling for 8 years. Will you please explain why you never told us that? Or is Lord Monckton lying to us? So Tom Karl flannelled like mad and said, oh, well, he wouldn't have done the thing the same way as I had done it. So Joe Barton cut him off and said, you're both to go away and write letters to the committee explaining your facts. So all I did was to send a letter to the committee taking Tom Karl's own temperature data set, the NCDC temperature data set, and sure enough, for 8 years, it showed global cooling. He had tried to mislead Congress. He's now trying to mislead the world again, this time by pretending that there hasn't been this very long pause in global warming, during which for the last 18 years and 6 months, according to the satellite data that came out just 2 days ago, there has been no global warming at all, notwithstanding record increases in CO2 concentration. So we've got the CO2 concentration going through the roof. In fact, it's now higher than it's been in 810,000 years.
Absolutely, sir. But I mean, before you go any further, just as a political researcher, the Club of Rome, all these inside robber baron globalists that are the opposite of free market corporations are at war with the free market segment and, quite frankly, taking it over. We're in deep trouble. And so productivity's in deep trouble. They're in a consolidation period. We're being conquered, basically. But even if carbon dioxide was bad, even if it was warming us up, even if all these lies were true, we always have that debate on the science, which I know is important, and you've won that debate. They just keep stonewalling, and separately, how does paying gore and blood carbon trading in London, or paying the Chicago Mercantile that Obama is invested in, and that Soros is invested in, and then N.M. Rothschild, how does paying these billionaires billions and billions and trillions in the aggregate, how does that save the earth when you move 1,000 coal plants from the U.S. to Mexico and China, where they have no controls and they're totally dirty and ours are clean? How? So, I mean, it's all a fraud. It's all a scam. So I think
give you the figures on that, because China overtook the United States just 10 years ago as the world's largest emitter, and in 10 years has become twice as large an emitter of CO2 as the United States. And what does Obama do? He goes to his fellow communists last December in China and says, you can go on emitting as much CO2 as you like. I'm going to shut down the U.S. economy so you don't have to compete with it for natural resources.
Unbelievable.
It's a big concern of the Chinese. And the Chinese have said, yeah, we're happy with that. Well, what's not to like? So what is happening here? You're quite right about these rich people who have clambered onto this climate bandwagon, because this, Alex, is the fastest transfer of wealth and power
ever
from poor people worldwide to rich people worldwide in human history. That's what it's really all about.
And they package it as helping poor people.
Yeah. Because as you've said, they don't care about poor people. They care about them if they're voters. Otherwise, they don't care about them at all. And even then, not much. They want to get rich. They have realized that by coming up with this ridiculous, increasingly, visibly ridiculous climate mantra, they can get shovelfuls of cash. That's why Tom Carl comes out with these dopey papers and puts all those falsehoods in front of them.
Well, I mean, how many times can they get caught with fake data and fake data sets in the emails, you know, to hundreds of other groups, faking everything? I mean, how many times can they get caught until they get into some type of trouble? I want you to answer that, Policer. And then in closing, what about Al Gore in a speech? We played the clip last week, in 2007, getting his Nobel Prize, or 2006, saying that the Antarctic ice cap will be completely gone by 2013, and now it's at record levels. I mean, he's got to get caught saying polar bears are all dying when their numbers are up fivefold.
That's right. The polar bears' numbers are up. It's the Arctic ice cap he was talking about, and that is still there, very much still there. You've got my piece now, I see, on the...
But wasn't he talking about... he was talking about Arctic, yeah, the northern. I said the southern, sorry.
Yes. And the Arctic ice is still there, even in the summer. And it wouldn't matter terribly much if it disappeared in the summer. It's only going to disappear for a few weeks. Again, the laws of thermodynamics dictate that for the rest of the time it's got to be there because of the way the sun hits at an angle. So all of these fictions are beginning to become more and more implausible. That's the significance of Tom Carl's ludicrous paper, because what he is having to do is to produce so absurd a false result that even a layman like me can look at it and find the most obvious way of showing it's an absurd result, which is if the air above the surface isn't warming, if the ocean below the surface is hardly warming, how can the surface itself be warming? The answer is it can't. It's an offense against the laws of thermodynamics, the laws of how heat moves around in a system. There is no way that his result can be correct. It is really as simple as that, and that's the point.
Are you saying 2 plus 2 doesn't really equal 5 like Common Core says?
That's it. I'm saying 2 plus 2 still equals 4. Like it or not, Alex, I'm old-fashioned about these things. And what they are saying is they are now in desperation coming out with lies that are so absurd that you can knock them down in 2 minutes. It's not even